morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Happy Monday, lovelies. Monday, May 11th, 2026. It's so nice to see you all here this wonderful Monday morning. I'm extremely tired. I am extremely tired and I want to go back to sleep. I did not go on the walk this morning. I woke up at 4 a.m. I looked at my phone in utter disgust. Just utter, utter disgust at my phone this morning when I was like, oh, do I have to go on a walk this morning? Probably not. I could probably get away with not doing it this morning. And then after debating with myself for about 10 minutes, I woke up again at around 5:45 in the morning and then said, well, guess we're going to postpone the walk today. At some point, I had just like given up on the notion of being awake. My- oh, so since about 6 o'clock this morning, I have been chugging coffee to try and wake up because I looked at my schedule this morning. I have no fewer than 12 meetings today. 12. I have 12 meetings today. Y'all, I hate corporate America so much. I absolutely hate corporate America so much. I cannot begin to describe to you the pain of corporate America. Oh, Lord. Mm. So it's good to see everyone here this morning. JP's here, Faye's here. Thank you for stopping by. If you're not subscribed to the chat, there are rules to this stream. Unfortunately, this stream in my channel in general is hyper focused on a specific thing, and that is improving relations between theists and atheists and to help people see things from both sides, to help the communication between both sides. And so the constant yelling and screaming and debate tactics, we're not here to debate. We're here to genuinely analyze things, to genuinely speak about ourselves and being more secular and less religious, and to provide reasonable explanations for why we don't necessarily agree with things, even though you may already believe you may be a theist, which you are welcome here. We're not trying to dissuade you from being a theist. We are trying to dissuade you from using terrible argumentation. Um, today's subject will revolve around that. But in case you're wondering why you need to be subscribed to chat, why you need to be subscribed to post comments on videos, that's the toll you have to pay. I need a hit of dopamine before I'm going to allow you to troll my videos or just do drive-by comments or anything like that. I'm not looking for a lot of viewers. I'm not looking for a whole ton of exposure. I'm looking for genuinely good conversation. And so a lot of that has to um, has to come down to filtering out the drive-bys, filtering out the people who are just going to be here because of the algorithm one-shot them or because they shared their link in their private Discord at 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm just not interested in that. So that's the toll. You have to give me that hit of dopamine, and you got to chill for 20 minutes before you can spam me with all your stuff. So that being said, this coffee is disgusting. It tastes like dirt. I should not have cheaped out on my coffee. We will attempt to continue to use the girl voice, and I can feel it slipping already. We will attempt to continue to use the more pleasant femme voice rather than the deeper masculine voice for the remainder of the stream, but I guarantee you it's going to falter. It's still not that fantastic anyway, but we're going to get there, don't worry. One day at a time, one day at a time. I'm trying to undo 20 years of training here, so. Mm. Okay, so, yeah, my life has been oh so wonderful lately, just oh so wonderful. I did nothing this weekend. I hope you did the exact same. Hope you had a lovely Mother's Day. If you celebrate Mother's Day, I personally don't, so there's that. But if you do celebrate Mother's Day, I hope you had a very wonderful Mother's Day. I hope you had a very wonderful weekend. And I hope you enjoy doing whatever it is that you kind folks enjoy doing. Because I myself really did enjoy doing nothing this weekend. Didn't go out, didn't do anything. I did program a little bit. I did a little bit of development work on an indie game concept I'm working on. It's called Lunch Break Games, and I'm working on this basically this small little indie game concept where I want to develop a series of very small, very quick games you can play. Just pick up and play on your lunch break, or even after you come home from work and you just want to relax for a little bit, but you don't want to deep dive into an immersive world that you know you're going to lose time to, and you know you're going to lose sleep over. Um, Something to help your brain unwind, that sort of thing. Nothing too intricate, too dramatic, but yeah, I'm working on that concept. So in the UK, Mother's Day is during Lent. Oh, thank you, JP. I didn't know that. If you're not from the US and you didn't celebrate Mother's Day, I hope you had a great weekend. That's all. Mm. Yes. So, um, I do have my opinions on things. I don't necessarily think that to reiterate, to restate things once a week. I think at the beginning of the week we need to refresh and rehash, remind ourselves to pull ourselves into get that inner peace. That we're not here to criticize individuals, and we're not here to criticize beliefs. But what we are here to criticize are bad arguments, and we are here to say, listen, if you're going to argue with me about certain things, I want those arguments to make sense, and I want you to understand, and I want you to demonstrate to me that you understand the logical entailments of your position. And so, if you understand the logical entailments of your position, but you still hold a belief to a particular conclusion that maybe isn't part of those logical entailments, that's fine. I don't necessarily judge you for that. We all hold those positions. I hold my own positions with my relational atheism. But we're here more to have healthy discussions. Healthy discussions about being an atheist, about being a secularist, even about being a theist if you're a theist. We want to have those healthy discussions. We want to have those open discussions. And we're not necessarily here to have those um, debate bro, Phil bro discussions. So if your discussions revolve around things such as word games or trying to assert platonic forms, you're generally not going to have a good time here. I'm just going to give you a heads up here. But today is not about that. Today is about the fine tuning argument. Now, the fine tuning argument is a fascinating argument to me as an engineer because I see engineers fall for the fine tuning argument all the time. It's a really. I'm sorry. I'm still practicing. I'm still trying to get the voice up there, get the squeaky up there, but it's very difficult. It's a very slow process. So I hope you'll I hope you'll live with me as I go through this process. Um, the fine tuning argument is fascinating to me because as an engineer, a software engineer again for 20 years now, in live streaming and all that fun stuff. I'm fascinated by how many engineers cling to the fine tuning argument, and fall for the fine tuning argument because it's kind of a flawed argument. If you don't already believe in some manner that there is an all-powerful creator with the intention to create life, from an apologetic standpoint, from a not a refutation or a defeater, but from an objection to naturalism standpoint, philosophically, it's a rather sound, not fully sound, but at least partially sound objection to naturalism. But again, I said objection is the weaker of the big three to argumentation. You have refutation, which is outright destroys the argument. There's defeaters, which offer problems for the argument, but not necessarily refutes them. And then objections to the argument that says, hey, your argument doesn't sufficiently explain a few things, and here's what they don't sufficiently explain. Not necessarily says your argument is wrong, but says there's an insufficiency in the explanation. And so, if you take a purely materialistic, naturalistic approach um, to reality, the fine tuning argument can be an objection to naturalism, not necessarily a sound objection, but if you listen to the premises, and you don't necessarily wave them, you just hand wave them away, because you can hand wave away a few of the philosophical premises because they're underdetermined. Um, there is a big underdetermination problem with the fine tuning argument. But if you don't wave those away, if you just take them at face value, and then you can address those later. But it is something that somebody can rationally propose as an objection to naturalism. Now, that's not to say there aren't answers to it. There are plenty of answers to the objections, and that's when we start going down the rabbit hole of all this stuff. So, let's go into the fine tuning argument first, and then we'll start talking about what my particular problems with the fine tuning argument are, as well as my particular sort of systems level analysis to fine tuning is. Because my analysis is not necessarily the typical atheist objection to the objection, we'll say. So the Steelman version, as far as I can tell, of fine tuning is not the universe looks pretty or ordered, or anything like that. Therefore, God. It's more like, and I wrote this down. Let me get this. The universe appears to depend on a narrow range of physical parameters, laws, and initial conditions that permit complex chemistry, stable matter, long-lived stars, entropy gradients, galaxies, planets, and eventually leads to observers. This is assuming you take the old Earth, a deep time view on cosmology, which I do hold to. Obviously, I mean, I'm not Matt Powell. If many of those parameters had been even somewhat different, life of any recognizable complex kind would not arise. So the question is not merely why is there life, but why is reality structured in a way that permits any life-capable complexity at all? Note that the Steelman version of the fine-tuning argument does not say the really dumbed down version of why is the universe fine-tuned for life? Because that is very easy to object to and say 99% of the universe ain't. It seems to be more fine-tuned for black holes. so so in this particular Steelman version of the fine-tuning argument, we're not saying that the fine-tuning argument is not saying that the universe is fine-tuned for life, but rather the universe is structured in a way that permits life-capable complexity. That's a much narrower, much more honed attack on naturalism than the general sloppy apologetics version, because the general sloppy apologetics version is meant for conversational banter, let's say. And that is kind of a useless way to discover anything, I guess. So, now, the argument itself in the Steelman version, as far as I could find in any real philosophical papers, SEP, all this stuff, only really addresses three broad explanations. It addresses brute facts, the selection effect or multiverse hypotheses, and then also says the only other third option is design or intention. I have a problem with these explanations. And this is where sort of my objection to the objection comes in, but we'll go through each one of the Steelman answers first. Brute facts say that the universe just happens to be life permitting, that there is no deeper explanation. Brute facts are just brute facts. The constants of the universe are just the constants of the universe. I myself don't hold to brute facts, and we'll get to that in a minute, but brute facts are a very difficult thing to get past because you do have to demonstrate that there is something beyond the brute fact. And so that is a bit of a showstopper. You can scoff at it, you can say that's not an explanation, but unless you have a way to demonstrate that the brute facts come from something else and are therefore not brute facts, you have no way to defeat the objection of brute facts. And so that's one of the big weaknesses of fine tuning. That's where you have to step in and start doing the theological tap dancing. I also feel like brute facts are a bit of a conversation stopper as well. And so to to say brute facts is to sort of simultaneously put a stop to the theological objections. but it's also simultaneously stomping on the scientific process as well. It's kind of a weird it's kind of a weird sort of have your cake and eat it too position, where if you're going to say brute facts, you're also going to say that the scientific process has stopped. And that's kind of a weird thing to say. So I don't really like saying brute facts myself. Um, and it is kind of so it ends up being explanatorily weak, right? And but explanation weakness is not necessarily explanation insufficiency. My personal objection to it is just sort of admitting or sort of saying the scientific process is done at this point, which I think is wrong. For me, brute facts are kind of a weird thing to say. That's like saying scientific models are platonic forms. It's very weird to me. I don't necessarily like brute facts, but that's one of the objections. That's actually one of the objections I sort of side with the theist on, going, that's stupid. Now, there's the multiverse selection effect explanation. Many universes or domains exist with different parameters or could exist with different parameters. It's a hypothetical. We observe a life permitting one because only life permitting universes can contain observers. Fair objection. I mean, multiverse conjecture has some standing within mathematical formulations within the scientific universes. So they may be possible. We can't discount them. I don't necessarily hold to the multiverse objection myself, but because here's the problem: unless independently supported, it can look like multiplying unobserved realities, just like multiplying unobserved entities. And so it's about as weak as the God explanation is. And that makes it equally as valid if you're having this conversation. But if you're doing it to avoid an unobserved designer, you haven't refuted or defeated the unobserved designer. You've only created a symmetry. And so creating that symmetry means there's no symmetry break, which means both of them are equally invalid. It's a very weird objection. I don't necessarily hold to multiverse. Multiverse in the Marvel Comics sense. If you are holding to multiverse in the cyclic universe sense, which falls under the broad category of multiverse conjectures, that necessarily isn't the same thing, and there is, I think, a little bit more reason to expect a cyclical type of universe than there is a Marvel Comics multiverse explanation, but both of them are kind of equally untestable right now, so it's just sort of a showstopper of an argument. Now, the third explanation is design and intention, and this is where they say this: because those two fail, therefore it must be design or intention. I've written out the formal syllogism. Uh, Premise one: the universe has physical laws, constants, and initial conditions that fall within a life permitting range. Premise two: the life permitting range appears narrow relative to the broader range of conceivable or mathematically possible alternatives. Premise three: a life permitting universe is more expected if reality is grounded in a purposive intelligence than if reality is indifferent, random, or brute. Premise four: when one hypothesis makes the observed data significantly less surprising than its rivals, that data counts as evidence for the hypothesis. I don't necessarily like premise four myself, but I would necessarily revise that from counts as evidence for the hypothesis and counts as making the hypothesis more likely. A conclusion, therefore: the apparent fine tuning of the universe is evidence. Again, evidence is favoring a purposive intelligence behind, beneath, or prior to the universe. Here's where my objections come. Now, the typical atheist responses are going to say, how do you know that the constants could have been changed? How do you know that they could have been anything? And here's my primary objection. Um, when used as an apologetic, this fails to prove a God. This fails to demonstrate a God. You have to do a lot of metaphysical tap dancing to get to a God entity, and specifically in evangelical Christianity, the Christian God, the triomni classical triune God. Rather than a God, this supports a designer. This does not necessarily need to be a triomni being or a duo omni being or even an omnipotent being. This could very well lead you to an alien species that reconstructed an earlier universe with sufficiently advanced technology to better support organized life, or it could also come from a programmer on some sort of hyper advanced computer creating a simulation, and the parameters, as we understand them, are actually a part of a procedural generation algorithm. For those of you who don't know what procedural generation is, that's the family of algorithms that are used in games like NetHack, roguelites like Brogue, games like Dwarf Fortress, where they're used to procedurally, step by step, create worlds. You have no way of differentiating between an intentional, hyper intelligent creator god and a nerdy as fuck programmer who decided, hey, I'm going to make a really cool game and I'm going to watch it play out. So you've essentially posited a deistic developer god whose initial conditions is essentially the random seed number to the procedural generation algorithm. It doesn't get you, as an apologetic, it's sloppy, and it gets you closer to simulation theory than it does to theism. And so using fine tuning as a theistic argument is a really weird argument because the core fundamental issues, besides the scientific issues, which there are numerous ones, the core fundamental issue is that the purposive intelligence behind it is extremely loose. It's extremely loosely worded, and purposive intelligence does not necessarily mean divine creator. It could very well mean a sufficiently hyper advanced human like entity from far off in the past who just existed in another part of a cyclic multiverse universe. Their universe was dying and they recreated it so they could live again. That's it. Um, you have no way of differentiating between the two. And the other problem is purposive intelligence is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, because you haven't demonstrated that it must be a purposive intelligence. You haven't demonstrated the need for an intelligence. You've only asserted it. In all of the premises, nothing here says that it can't be a purposeless cosmic being. And this is the real big crux of my issue with the fine tuning argument. Um, it does not necessarily need to be a god, it just needs to be really, really powerful. So here's the issue. I have no way, once I get back to, even if I accept your argument that the parameters are all somehow hyper fine tuned in some way, right? They're the parameters of the universe. Even if I ignore the fact that you're doing weird things with scientific models and turning scientific models into platonic forms, and I don't even want to go down that road this very second. We'll do that in a minute. Even if I accept your phrasing of the fine tuning argument, it doesn't separate me between your God, an intelligent designer, right, and a being so hyper powerful that's not an omnipotent being, but rather just a hyper cosmic being. That it's so hyper powerful, not even super hyper intelligent, just hyper powerful, that it's not even aware it created the conditions for us to exist. That is, I have no way of discerning between your God and a cosmic opossum named Opie, who is so powerful, we merely exist as part of her drool. And here's the really weird thing about this objection to fine tuning. We have a problem in cosmology called dark energy. We can't answer what dark energy is. To answer what dark energy is from a theological framework, to make a prediction about what dark energy is from a theological, classical, evangelical, Christian apologetic standpoint, you have to say something that God is doing something. What it is, you don't know. You can't make a prediction about it. You can't tell us that sometime in the future we may discover X. There is no prediction about dark energy. In Opie the Cosmic Opossum scenario, I can say that the prediction, and this is the weirdest thing, is that the predictive power of Opie the Cosmic Opossum is that because we are part of her cosmic drool that is currently falling from her mouth, that is necessarily where dark energy comes from. The falling motion of Opie's drool. That's the prediction. It's stupid. It's not a valid scientific method. But in terms of framing of this argument, Opie the Cosmic Opossum is more parsimonious with observed effects of reality than the evangelical divine creator God. And this is the crux of my argument against the fine-tuning argument. Absurdities like Opie the Opossum are as unobservable and as not disprovable as your God is. So if you're going to use the fine-tuning argument, it is a silly argument because absurdities like this, which are not observable and not provable and not demonstrable, just as undemonstrable as the triomni God is, there's no symmetry break between them. So the argument itself, when used as an apologetic, well, when the argument itself, because it assumes intelligence to begin with, is flawed, is silly. So, have you read Percy Shelley's Refutation? I have not read Percy Shelley's Refutation, JP. I'm sorry, I have not. Now, I hold to neither of these. I don't actually hold to Opie the Cosmic Opossum drooling us into reality. But what I do say about Opie the Cosmic Opossum, good morning, Ryan, good to see you. But what I do say but the reason I say Opie the Cosmic Opossum is because it's to highlight the absurdity of insisting on a purposive intelligence in creating everything. There's no way to demonstrate with the fine-tuning argument that it's purposive. There's no reason to assume hyperintelligence. It could be a really dumb cosmic being. You don't know that, and you can't demonstrate that with the fine-tuning argument. This is why the fine-tuning argument is just silly. It's a very, very silly argument. Now, there are very technical reasons why it's a silly argument as well. For example, the fine-tuning argument holds into necessarily equivocates scientific models as Platonic forms, and this is one of the weirdest things about the fine-tuning argument, that it necessarily requires that constants exist independent of scientific models. And that's a fundamental category error. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how scientific models work. Constants in scientific models are basically, we observe these things. We have no way to construct them or reconstruct them yet in any way, shape, or form. For example, gravity. We don't have a method of constructing macro level gravity out of quantum physics yet, or bridging that gap. And so we still have to work on that. The theory of quantum gravity is something that's actively being worked on today. And so gravity is just a constant. It's just a number we plug in. The speed of light is just a constant. It's a number we plug in. It's not necessary. We don't necessarily know where or if it emerges from something else, and we don't have a way of explaining how it emerges from something else necessarily just yet. I'm sure there are scientists out there. I'm sure Leo Phileas could jump in here and correct me. I'm sure Dr. Blitz can correct me, and all that stuff. I'm not one of those scientists. I am a software engineer, not a genius. So you're when you make the fine-tuning argument, you are making the assertion that there is no deeper level to the constants of our scientific models. You're also making the assertion that scientific models cannot be different, and therefore the constants cannot be different. It's a Excuse me. I'm sorry, I almost choked to death on my own spit. Hooray, I'm smart. I know how to operate as a human being. You got friends in the background? Uh-oh. Yes, I do have friends in the background. Say hello. I haven't named them yet. You guys want to name them? You guys want to name them, Ryan? You can name them if you want. I don't have names for them yet. I need if anybody can find one, by the way, if anybody can find an opossum plushie that's pretty big like a squishmallow is, please let me know. I will buy it instantly. Let me know. Um yes, I do have friends in the background. But excuse me. Sorry about that. Uh I know how to human correctly. Yeah, so the issues I have with fine tuning are numerous. And so to assert that there are no deeper truths, there are no deeper explanations for things such as gravity, for things such as the speed of light, for things such as the expansion rate, for things such as the Hubble tension, which, by the way, it's not the Hubble constant anymore, it's the Hubble tension, um, which is another interesting problem. Is to assert fine tuning is to assert that there is no deeper explanation than what we have. And so to assert that is to basically assert that the scientific process has ended as well. This is another absurdity with the fine tuning argument that I just do not agree with. There are very much unresolved things in science. The scientific model, especially when it comes to cosmology, very much, very much unresolved. We have current observed tensions in cosmology that are going to require changes to the cosmological model. Maybe not grand changes, maybe not a complete reformulation, but we are going to have changes in our models of cosmology. If that's the case, who's to say that our understanding of other constants aren't going to change? And so to assert the fine tuning argument is to assert that science is done. It's a very strange argument to make to me. That's one of the so you're essentially saying that we've now established what the Platonic form of the scientific model of reality is. And that's weird. That's hyper weird because even in the standard model of particle physics, um, we still have some observations in there that could end up being seen. And particle physics is far more complete than, say, cosmology is, for example. But keep in mind, we don't have a theory of everything yet either. We're trying to get a theory of everything that fits everything together, but right now everything's like really disjointed. There are things that fit together and things that don't. We think a theory of everything will come together once we figure out quantum gravity, but we still don't understand that yet. So maybe one day. So to assert fine tuning is to assert this weird Platonic form of science that truly does not exist yet. That is, and to assert that and some of the counter and so this puts the atheist in a weird position as well because some of the counters to fine tuning coincidentally also oddly assert that science is done. That's where like the brute facts objection sort of loses steam. It's just like that's weird. And you're just gonna say gravity's a brute fact? That's weird. I'm going with the gambler gambit. Have we ever investigated phenomenon and found a god as the explanation? No, therefore it isn't likely to be an explanation. Valera, thank you for saying that. Yes, um, and this is a very interesting objection that theists don't necessarily have a very good answer to. This is part of the divine hiddenness argument, or a subset of the divine hiddenness argument, the gambler gambit. And it's I could you could more refine this away from a gambler metaphor to a scientific or statistical metaphor, in that for every proposition about the natural world that we've found, we've managed thus far, um, outside of the extreme bleeding edges of science, we've managed to push God out of the picture, right? And so we've essentially said, hey, no, that's actually a fallacy. It's called God of the gaps. And so, because of all the explanations for God have failed in some way, shape, or form, God has had to retreat to very many different fields. And that's why we're seeing arguments for God in the modern day not necessarily argue from a scientific vantage point, although you do see that with like young earth creationists and less refined apologists still argue from like, can you reproduce life in a lab? No, abiogenesis is false, therefore God. You still see God of the gaps there all the time, but again, this is the bleeding edge of science. And we anticipate pushing God out of those gaps as well. Plus, God, and here's the ultimate irony of the God explanation. Um, if you grant God as an explanation, if you grant the theist saying God is an explanation, you're doing something categorically wrong. You're the one making the category error here. God is not a scientific explanation because God is not a how. God is a noun. God is a who. Um, and so when somebody says life arose or evolution happens or the universe started in its current instantiation because of God, that's not a how. They can even, and this puts the theist in a very strange, when they're making this type of art, and if you're a theist, I want you to understand, I'm not criticizing your belief, I'm criticizing your argumentation here. If you're going to argue that God caused the Big Bang, okay, you're not giving me an explanation of how the Big Bang occurred. Now, you could say your Holy Bible said God spoke it into existence, but that doesn't explain anything because speaking is a human action. It's an action that requires the reverberation of air molecules to transmit information to other thinking agents. And so speaking is very much post Big Bang. You need the universe to already be in its current instantiation for speaking to be possible. So to say God spoke it into existence is to redefine what the word speaking means, what the action of speaking is. So it's not a valid how explanation. You need to now stack on explanations for what the hell you mean. And so when you say God did it, what you're really saying is who did it? Well, now I can just posit other who's and be equally as valid. For you to say God did it and God did it through speaking is the equivalent of me saying an ancient alien species did it and they did it through a Genesis bomb. Well, what the hell does that mean? I don't know. I just made it up because bombs can't exist outside of the known universe as we know it today. But it's equally as valid as claiming that something spoke without air pressure. It's a very silly explanation. That's why I sort of try to dissuade people from using the fine-tuning argument. It's a very, very silly explanation and a very silly argument. It's an interesting objection against purely materialistic naturalism, or not materialistic naturalism, philosophical naturalism. It's a very interesting objection to that, but if you're going to posit fine-tuning as an argument for the existence of a creator deity, you're going to run into a lot of problems. And all of them hinge on we exist in a natural world. The natural world, as we can tell with our observations, unfolds naturally. And yes, there may be gaps in our understanding, but that doesn't give you metaphysical space to wedge in a God unless you provide the how mechanism. And by and large, you don't do that. And so if you want to posit something unnatural, not supernatural, unnatural, because again, supernatural is unnatural. I've said this before, not necessarily on the stream, but the supernatural is definitionally unnatural. It is non-natural. It's not supernatural. It's non-natural. That's really what you're positing because you're trying to make this weird metaphysical argument to try and firewall off your beliefs from what we observe in reality. And so, from the natural to come from the non-natural, you have to exist in this metaphysical fog, and that's fine if you want to hold those beliefs. But if you want to use those beliefs as as having explanatory weight in the scientific sense, as the defeater or the refutation of naturalism, you can't exist in the firewall of metaphysics. You have to give an account for how you get from metaphysics, from the non natural to the natural. And so a lot of people just don't. I don't think you can do it, to be honest with you. I don't necessarily see a way to do it. So if you're going to use the fine-tuning argument, please be aware you're going to run into these problems. Now, here's the big thing, and here's the thing that I hold to when it comes to have you seen Joe Schmidt and Matthew Adelstein defending fine-tuning argument? No, I have not, Kohota. I don't watch Joe Schmidt because Joe Schmidt is very half homework about it. The problem with Joe Schmidt is that he presents a very one-sided. He thinks he knows everything because he's very deep into philosophy argument, and this is in general as an engineer. This is my problem with um this is my problem with Joe Schmidt as a whole, is that as an engineer, I observe systems, and he doesn't give systems explanations. He gives he gives philosophical argumentations, which is a fine place to start from. But he also draws all of his conclusions purely from only parts of the philosophy he's speaking about. He does not give the whole explanation. For example, in the I go back to this all the time with Joe Schmidt. In his video on why Pascal's wager, he concludes that Pascal's wager makes sense. He doesn't discuss modern decision theory. He doesn't discuss modern investment theory. He doesn't discuss things from a 2026 framework. He discusses things purely from basically Pascal's 17th century proposition of Pascal's wager. He also doesn't discuss the multitude of objections to it. He doesn't. He leaves all of that to the side, and he tries to either hand wave it away or he just ignores it, which is not a proper way to engage with arguments like that. And so the reason I don't watch Joe Schmidt is because he leaves half the homework out and forces me to do a whole shitload of research before I can come to a different conclusion or even the same conclusion as him. And so I don't like watching his videos. He already comes in with his preferred conclusion and then presents his argument to get to his preferred conclusion. He doesn't reach conclusions based on an entire body of evidence with his videos. And so I don't necessarily like that. Plus, he does this purely from an argumentative stance. As an engineer, I appreciate making the argument, but making the argument is not the same as implementing the details. And as an engineer, I make arguments all the time with my fellow engineers, with my bosses, with my coworkers, with my stakeholders. As a software engineer, I make arguments all the time. Arguments are great for starting points, but they are not conclusive. The implementation, the details of how things actualize in reality, that's what's conclusive. And so if you're going to make arguments about metaphysics, that's fine, but you have no way of implementing, observing, measuring, or concluding anything other than making a metaphysical argument. And so if you're going to make a metaphysical argument and you're going to live purely in metaphysics as a software engineer, and this is what I learned coming up 20 years in the industry, we have called philosophy students and people who teach philosophy and do nothing but exist in philosophy a bunch of fart huffers, because they try to pretend they exist in this ethereal plane above reality when they have to shit in a toilet too, and they pretend they don't. And that's really my problem with people like Joe Schmidt. That's why I don't watch his content. It's this horseshit. His content is absolute horseshit, of philosophical fart huffing, And it's just like you have no way to demonstrate any of this. You have no way to you've already got a preferred conclusion. It's very clear he has preferred conclusions already. And then he walks the user through to his preferred conclusion each and every time. It was the same thing with his argument against Matt Dillahunty and evidences that arguments are not evidence. He has his preferred conclusion. He presented his preferred conclusion, and he got rightfully thrashed for that preferred conclusion. Him and Alex O'Connor both, because they were arguing from a completely different framework, and that framework, while valid in that particular framework, is not valid in the real world. Even courts agree that arguments are not evidence. And so it's a very strange proposition to make. And maybe in the philosophical, purely epistemological sense, arguments are evidence. I have many big feelings about that. I don't. If you're just going to exist purely in metaphysics and purely in epistemology, you can reframe evidence to mean that. Fine. But once you step outside of that framework and you step inside reality, you need to cash out in reality. You need to show something that actualizes in reality, and arguments don't do that. Arguments are purely an epistemological thing. So you can have all the perfect logic in the world, but if it doesn't show up in reality, it doesn't fucking matter. So, have you heard of the star writing analogy about it? The star writing in the night sky would be unlikely under naturalism. Shows that naturalism doesn't predict fine tuning, but theism does. I don't necessarily, again, my objections here, and I don't really care. Again, Kohota, I'm not really going to dwell on Joe Schmid much more. I don't really care about the star writing analogy. I've heard about it. I don't necessarily care about it. It's again a very strange analogy because it's not evidence of anything. It's just an analogy. And I don't care about Joe Schmidt. He forces me to do so much stuff, so much extra legwork that I can't watch his videos. They're far too long for what they are, and they only do half the homework. And that's why I absolutely hate his content. I don't recommend people watch it. I recommend you go out and actually learn this stuff and not digest his content, because he exists purely in a hard philosophy stance, and he does not implement in reality. It's a terrible, terrible way to go about living your real life. Anyway, I wanted to get to my objection to the fine tuning argument. I don't give a shit about Joe Schmidt. Joe Schmidt is trash. Don't watch him. Um, here's my problem with fine tuning, and all the objections to it. It does not take into account any emergent or relational accounts of reality. And in this case, I would necessarily posit that the laws, that the constants, that reality itself emerges from an earlier state. Earlier states where we see different forces, different fundamental forces like electromagnetism, the nuclear force, the strong force, the weak force, emerge from a combined force. So, for example, we've demonstrated that at sufficiently high power energy densities, the electromagnetic force and the weak force combine into the electroweak force, and then once those energy densities come down, they separate slowly. So why would I stop at brute facts? Why would I stop at brute facts when I can step this back and say, well, what if the brute facts of reality, what if the constants of reality of those scientific models are actually emergent from underlying properties? Um, what if, and this is what I hold to, what if those constants are just a necessary expression of time-bounded force separation? That's kind of a sloppy way to put it, but it'll do for now. Um, so, for example, before the Big Bang makes no sense because there's no time. But if we're discussing things at the quantum superposition singularity state here, that doesn't make any sense, right? The coexistence of everything at once. Um, if we're discussing that, right? Um, who is to say that all of these constants, all these fine-tuned things are just the necessary conclusions from the separation of everything, in the time-bounded manner? And so what we see from the last 13.8 billion years is not necessarily is not necessarily um, from the last 13.8 billion years is not necessarily like constants, but is just an ongoing, elongated, and very slow to us process that unfolds very slowly of these forces just separating and distributing and dissolving. What if what we have is really just a very elongated 13.8 billion year long, so far as we can estimate, form of macro level pareidolia? What if all of this is just us saying, well, this all looks really ordered, but it only looks ordered because everything just sort of separated in this way, and then once the energy densities get low enough, they're just going to continue to separate and sort of dissolve into bupkis. I mean, what's at what point do we say, well, we saw the forces, we can see the forces combining, and our models allow for this, and the mathematics allow for this to combine into a single unified type of force. Although I don't think we've unified all the forces just yet, but maybe we'll get there, maybe we won't. But we see these forces unifying as we get closer and closer to the singularity. Why does it stop? Why are we asserting with fine tuning that it stops? Because that's what fine tuning is asserting, that it stops, and it also just sort of dodges this point that these things have emerged from prior states already. We watched it emerge from prior states. We've seen well, we've not observed the whole process, but we've observed individual predictions of galaxies emerging from prior states. As part of our model predictions. And so I'm not saying we've seen the Milky Way galaxy emerge as the Milky Way galaxy, but I am saying we've seen older galaxies through our telescopes and they fit predictions. There are some galaxies that don't fit predictions, and that's really exciting. Those are more tensions in cosmology, which is really cool. James Webb Space Telescope has been really, really awesome. Devil's in the details. Honestly, I find the argument of fine tuning one of the weaker ones. Lots of silly assumptions. Well, Ed, um, the thing about the fine tuning argument is I'm actually building up a series on different counter arguments to various apologetics, not necessarily theism as a whole, but necessarily evangelical Christianity in America apologetics. And so fine tuning is where I'm sort of starting from. And my next one I'm going to discuss, which I'm actually going to be on Skeptic Philosophy's channel on Sunday. I'll be on this Sunday. I'll be on his channel giving my sort of next presentation, I guess. Will be, and probably next Monday I'll go over it a little bit more detail. It is going to be the Kalam cosmological argument. And I sent you this email, Ed, which is why I wanted to get your feedback on it to see if I was on the right track. The Kalam cosmological argument is necessarily almost its own self refutation of the American evangelical God. And so I'm going to be discussing that on Robert's channel this Sunday, and I'll go into it in more detail next Monday. But the point of the analogy in that fine tuning of the universe is so unlikely under naturalism. A God with specific psychology, like wanting life, would make sense to explain fine tuning. No, again, Coda, you missed the entire stream. There's so much presupposition in that statement. You're already presupposing that a God would want it. You have no answer for an ultimate cosmic being that's so powerful that it doesn't even know it created us. But you have to go back to early in the stream. Again, Joe Schmidt does not address objections like this because he has his preferred conclusions. Again, the star analogy is not a good analogy. I don't know. There's so much wrong with the fine tuning. Please go back into the stream and watch it before you comment again, because I'm not going to go over again, and I'm just going to mute you. If you're not going to pay attention to what was already said, I'm not going to discuss it with you. I've already said you have no way of determining an intentional designer from an ultimate cosmic entity that's not even a deity, that's just a really stupid cosmic entity that created us without intention, that doesn't even know it created us. That's how powerful it is. You have no way of discerning between the two. Whoop-de-doo. So it's a matter of psychology. It's a matter of it's a matter of asserting that there is intentionality in it. I don't understand how you can come to intentionality without also making scientific refutations about multiverse theory, and not just objections to multiverse theory, like from a personal standpoint, and not just saying, oh, that's just hand wavy atheism. I mean, actual legitimate scientific refutations of multiverse theories, like to assert that intentionality is necessary. You need to you need to show intentionality. You need to show that these other objections, not just from your preferred framework, don't make sense, but from a scientific model don't make sense. You have to show why. Now, if you want to do the classical multiverse theory objection, for example, the many worlds hypothesis, if you want to do a objection to multiverse hypothesis, um, many worlds hypothesis, which is where multiverse theory in general relates, you could say that many worlds theory requires requires a preferred frame of reference with a universal quantum field that expands everywhere and touches everything at all times, which also makes the assertion that the universe itself is a thing. It's really weird, but that becomes the preferred frame of reference, and so there is an objection to many worlds hypothesis in that it's sort of a violation of Einsteinian general relativity. There's that objection. It's not the best objection, but it is one of those objections that you couldn't you'd have to overcome. But again, there's a lot more deeper stuff from an engineering perspective, from a systems level analysis perspective, that you'd have to demonstrate so much more with fine tuning. There is a lot of baggage that has to be carried that fine tuning does not carry. That's the problem. You have to you don't cash, and the other problem is that fine tuning and creation arguments in general don't cash out in any observable effect. Um, and here's the real differentiating line between me as a senior software engineer of 20 years who deals in very complex systems for the United States government. And when I say very complex systems, I mean one of the systems I'm working on is literally a version of a hyper optimized version of Microsoft Excel. And if you think Microsoft Excel is a simplistic system, then you don't understand complex systems and you need to go back and relearn a lot of different things. Um, th- I deal with very complex systems in my life. Not necessarily quantum computers things, although I have touched the compile pipeline on quantum systems before. But that's neither here nor there. That's far less complicated than what I'm dealing with right now. As somebody who looks at these complex systems, and you make the argument from a metaphysical standpoint that God must necessarily exist in some manner, you're not cashing out in anything that is observable, in anything that is testable, in anything that is demonstrable. You are just saying my preferred story is really, really cool. Well, that's great. I'm glad you like your preferred story, but the rest of us still live in reality. We don't live in metaphysics. If you want, I can make the metaphysical argument that the Phoenix Force is real from Marvel Comics, guy. That doesn't necessarily equate to reality. And so this is my problem with philosophers who reside i- 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 at the plateau of metaphysics for their entire lives. Metaphysics can be useful if you are proposing a new model, if you're proposing a new theory, they can be useful in that regard. If you are proposing something that somehow necessarily violates a constraint, you could make arguments for why you should continue to delve down this line using metaphysics. And then if that can be justified, um, that constraint violation can be justified. You could then prove that constraint was wrong all along, and we can move on from there. But if you're going to argue purely from metaphysics, the problem is you're in the physical world. You are now dealing purely in abstracts. You are now dealing purely in the realm of your mind, in your abstract thinking. That's all you're doing, is you're dealing purely in abstract thinking. You're not cashing out in reality. You're not showing that anything has actualized. That's a waste of time. If your arguments exist purely at a metaphysical, undemonstrable level, it's a waste of everybody's time. If you want to argue for a deistic God, you're wasting everyone's time. There's no laws, there's no rules, there's no strings attached with a deistic God. If you're arguing for a Christian God, there are strings attached to that. You have to demonstrate that the God exists and does things in reality. If you're arguing for an Islamic God, you have the same problem. So the fine-tuning argument, unless you're somehow, again, arguing for a deistic creator God for some reason, doesn't matter. It's an utterly ridiculous argument. And so, for some reason, you want theism, and this preferred conclusions of wanting theism is very strange to me. It's very, very strange to me, and it's very. I don't understand why you, as a theist, cannot answer the question: what is the difference between your conclusion of an intentional creator and a super powerful, non-deistic cosmic being? It's not deistic. It's not omnipotent. Okay, it's not all powerful. It has limitations. It's not all knowing because it's stupid. It doesn't know it's doing it. What is the difference between your intentional creator and the cosmic idiot that accidentally creates us and doesn't realize we're there? There's no difference between. I have no demonstrable difference. There's no way to differentiate. There's no way to observe the difference between an intentional creator and a cosmic idiot. And to be honest with you, I mean, considering that the universe seems to want to collapse into nothing but black holes, it sure seems like if we're gonna side err on the side of deism, theism, or even deism. It seems like the deistic creator God is a cosmic idiot. So who cares about the argument? Like it's such a dumb metaphysical argument to have if you're going to insist that fine tuning makes sense. Because you can't demonstrate that other multiverses don't exist. You can't demonstrate that they do exist. However, there is mathematical backing to them. So could you provide the mathematical backing that refutes that that refutes that the mathematics are valid? That the theories, that the hypotheses are valid, that the conjectures are valid? Can you provide that refutation? No? Well, great. I can't refute that the tachyon exists either. So here we are. Here we are back to phase one, square one, where we sit in reality and everybody has to demonstrate everything. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. Things have to actualize in reality. We can't just sit here and ponder about shit all day. Things have to cash out. And so we're left with this metaphysical entity that allegedly created us, that I have no way of determining is smart or a fucking idiot. In the same way, I have no way of determining if multiverses exist or don't exist. In the same way, I have no way of determining if a white hole exists or doesn't exist, if a tachyon exists or doesn't exist. I have mathematics that say multiverses could exist. I have mathematics that say white holes could exist. I have mathematics that say wormholes could exist. I have mathematics that say warp drives could exist, that tachyons could exist. Could does not mean is. And so that's the fundamental problem with the fine-tuning argument and with every metaphysical argument ever. Now I'm going to go on this on Robert's stream on Sunday. Tomorrow's stream is going to be a different subject altogether. But when you make the fine-tuning argument, guys, when you make the fine-tuning argument, please keep in mind, you're not explaining anything. You're, you're making an assertion about why your belief is rational. That's all you're doing with the fine-tuning argument. You're not proving anything about reality. You're not demonstrating anything about reality. You are saying that my belief in a creator God is rational. Well, congratulations. My belief in Opie the cosmic opossum that drooled us into existence and is so stupid it doesn't even realize, is so powerful and so stupid it doesn't even realize that it created us, is rational in that same regard. I've never held that theism is irrational. I still don't hold that theism is irrational. But I feel like the argument that fine tuning is somehow some sort of evidence for theism being correct is fundamentally a flawed position to take. Anyway, that's the conclusion of my hypothesis. I'm once again, as every morning, late for work. So, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate that. Thanks for all the chats. Thank you for for being here. The cosmic idiot, yes, Faye, the cosmic idiot, and that's why God is not a good theory. But that doesn't mean God isn't a good belief. And I want you to understand something. If you're a believer, if you're a theist, if you hold to theism, I want you to understand something. I don't think you're irrational. Because at the end of the day, as a relational atheist, I understand that you are part of your community. You are part of humanity. So it's the same as I, right? We're all part of humanity. And then humanity, by and large, believes in some form of theism. And you believe in that too. As a social species, it is perfectly rational to come to the same conclusions, the same belief systems, the same structures as those around you. And that's fine. That is a perfectly rational reason to believe in a God. But please stop using irrational arguments to argue against people like me. It's silly. It's very, very silly. Don't do it. We'd appreciate that. Thank you so much for being here today. And I'll see you tomorrow morning for more Secular Sunrise. I love you all. Peace.